The wind shrieked through the trees like a chorus of banshees, rattling the windows of my house while snow piled up in menacing drifts outside. The street lights flickered dimly, their light barely piercing through the furious swirl of the blizzard. Somewhere out there, lost in the wrath of nature, was the woman responsible for this entire mess. Melinda Hawthorne, president of the Maple Heights Homeowners Association, neighborhood tyrant. And the very reason I was sitting here, cradling a mug of hot cocoa instead of doing what I usually did during snowstorms, clearing the streets with my snowplow. She had banned it, said it was an eyesore. And now, with the so-called storm of the century pummeling our quiet little town, she was out there somewhere, screaming for help. Trapped in her driveway, buried under 5 feet of snow. And me? I was about to experience the most satisfying moment of karma I'd ever witnessed in my entire life. 2 weeks earlier. If you told me 2 weeks ago that I'd be sitting here, smugly sipping cocoa while Melinda Hawthorne begged for help, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, it was just another Tuesday in Maple Heights, the pristine, rule-obsessed suburban enclave where I lived. I'd moved here 5 years ago. It was supposed to be a peaceful place to settle down. Affordable houses, decent neighbors, and quiet streets lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. Nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that's what I thought, until I met Melinda. Early 50s. Sharp, angular features frozen into a permanent scowl. The type of woman who marched around with a clipboard clutched in one hand like it was a royal scepter. Melinda Hawthorne made it her life's mission to enforce every rule in the HOA handbook, even the ones nobody cared about. Especially the ones nobody cared about. The color of your shutters? Regulated. The height of your lawn grass? Measured weekly. Even the kind of trash cans you used had to meet her arbitrary standards. And God help you if you stepped out of line. You'd wake up the next morning to find an official violation notice taped to your front door. Unfortunately, I owned something Melinda despised more than anything else in the world. A snowplow. And not just any snowplow. It was a beautiful, powerful beast of a machine. Bright red, fitted with heavy-duty chains, and capable of clearing an entire street in minutes. Every winter, I used it to help neighbors dig out from bad storms. Sometimes I made a little side money on the worst days. It was loud. It was big. And according to Melinda, it was ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic. For months, she hounded me about it, complaining at meetings, sending passive-aggressive emails, even knocking on my door once to politely suggest I store it somewhere else. Anywhere else. Then, just before the first snowflakes of winter started to fall, she finally got her way. The HOA meeting from hell. The Maple Heights HOA meeting was a disaster from the moment it started. Melinda stood at the front of the room like a queen addressing her court, her clipboard resting against her hip. She wore that smug smile, the one that made you want to throw something, and announced the newest community regulation with all the self-importance of a general declaring victory in battle. As of today, she declared, large utility vehicles, including snowplows, will no longer be permitted in residential driveways or on neighborhood streets. I stood up immediately, feeling heat rush to my face. You can't be serious, I said. You realize where we live, right? We get buried in snow every year. If I don't clear these streets, who's going to? Melinda didn't even flinch. She just waved a manicured hand. The city plows will handle it, she said. Your machine is an eyesore. We have standards in Maple Heights. The worst part? Most of the HOA board, a bunch of spineless sheep, nodded along with her. A few neighbors looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, but no one spoke up. I stormed out of the meeting that night, barely keeping my temper in check. I warned them. I told them this was a mistake, that they'd regret it when the next big storm hit. Melinda actually laughed. Oh, please, she said. You make it sound like we live in the Arctic. A little snow never hurt anyone. 2 weeks later, the blizzard hits. A little snow, she said. 2 weeks later, the blizzard hit. And it wasn't just bad. It was historic. The temperature plummeted overnight, and a moisture-heavy storm system rolled in fast. What was supposed to be a moderate storm turned into a whiteout nightmare. The wind howled relentlessly, whipping snow through the air so thick you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. By nightfall, the roads were completely impassable. The power flickered in and out in some houses. And the city plows? Nowhere to be seen. Overwhelmed. Understaffed. They were too busy clearing highways and major streets, which meant our neighborhood was buried. At first, Melinda stuck to her usual playbook. She sent a message in the Maple Heights group chat. "This is just a temporary inconvenience," she wrote. "The city will be here soon. Remain calm." By morning, the calm had completely evaporated. People were panicking. Some ran out of food. Elderly neighbors were trapped in their homes. Parents with young kids were desperate for formula and diapers. And Melinda? She finally realized she was in trouble. Her house was buried like the rest of ours. The wind had piled huge drifts against her doors and windows. Her car was buried so deep you couldn't even see the roof. She tried digging herself out with a snow shovel, but the second she slipped on the ice and landed face first in a snowbank, she started screaming for help. From the warmth of my living room, I could hear her muffled shrieks. I took another sip of cocoa and smiled. The begging begins. That's when it started. My phone buzzed with messages, one after another. Neighbors begging me to fire up my snowplow. "Please, Travis," someone wrote. "We need you." "Oh, now you need me?" I thought to myself. And then, the moment I've been waiting for, a desperate, high-pitched scream from outside. I walked over to my window and looked out. Melinda Hawthorne was standing in her driveway, wrapped in a ridiculous fur-lined coat, waving her arms like she was signaling a plane for landing. Her face was bright red from the cold, and her perfectly styled hair was plastered to her forehead, soaked with snow. And for the first time in my life, I heard her yell the words I never thought I'd hear. "Somebody help me. I am stuck." I just stood there for a moment, soaking it all in. The mighty HOA queen, reduced to a shivering, helpless mess. It was poetic. Could I have rushed out and fired up my plow right then? Sure, but where was the fun in that? Instead, I grabbed my phone and sent a single message to the group chat. I thought snowplows were against the rules. Chaos in the group chat. The group chat exploded. Some neighbors begged me to ignore the ban and help anyway. Others clearly enjoyed the irony as much as I did, filling the chat with laughing emojis. And Melinda? She saw it. She spun around and glared directly at my house. I swear, even through the double-pane glass, I could hear her grinding her teeth. I waved. The storm wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was getting worse. The snow kept falling in thick sheets, and the temperature had dropped so low that stepping outside, without serious gear, could be dangerous. No one was getting in or out of the neighborhood. And thanks to Melinda's ridiculous ban on my snowplow, no one was getting any help. I finished my cocoa as the messages on my phone became more frantic. People were running out of food. An older man named Mr. Perkins needed his heart medication. A young mother, Danielle, was desperate for baby formula. And still, no city plows. Finally, Melinda herself sent a message to the chat. "We must remain calm and follow proper procedures," she wrote. "The city will be here soon." It was the worst thing she could have said. Instantly, the chat erupted with angry replies. People were furious. They had trusted Melinda, and now they were paying the price. Some even suggested ignoring the HOA entirely. But without the right equipment, they were stuck. The phone call. By evening, things had gone from bad to dangerous. That's when my neighbor, Greg, called. "Travis," he said, his voice tight with worry. "We need your snowplow. People are running out of food. My wife's sick. I tried to dig us out, but my car is completely buried. No one's getting through this without help." I stared out the window at the swirling snow. Houses were half buried. Some people couldn't even open their doors. "I'd love to help," I said evenly. "But you know the rules." There was a long pause. "Come on, man. Don't do this because of Melinda." I wanted to help. I always had. But Melinda needed to understand. She needed to suffer a little longer. If I plowed the roads now, she'd twist the story. Take the credit. Pretend she'd allowed it. No, not yet. As if on cue, Melinda screamed again from her driveway. The breaking point. This time, she had a shovel in hand, pathetically trying to clear the mountain of snow burying her car. She wasn't making any progress. Every scoop she tossed was blown right back by the wind. She slipped again, landing hard on her backside. Seconds later, another message popped up in the chat. Travis, it read, as HOA president, I am officially requesting that you use your snowplow to clear the roads for the safety of this community. I burst out laughing. Now she wanted my help. I took a breath, then typed a response. I thought the city was handling it. The chat exploded again. People piled on. Some begged. Others demanded Melinda admit she was wrong. Finally, after an agonizing pause, Melinda typed back, Fine, the snowplow ban is lifted. Not good enough. How about you say it like you mean it? I replied. A few minutes later, after what must have been pure agony for her, she sent another message. I, Melinda Hawthorne, officially revoke the snowplow ban. The plow roars to life. That was all I needed. I pulled on my coat, trudged through waist-deep snow to my garage, and fired up the snowplow. The engine roared to life, and the headlights cut through the darkness as I rolled into the street. Neighbors emerged from their homes, watching with relief and gratitude as I carved a path through the snow. Some waved. A few even clapped. And Melinda? She stood in her driveway, arms crossed, shivering and humiliated. I could have cleared her driveway first, but I didn't. Instead, I angled the blade just right and pushed an even bigger pile of snow in front of her garage. She screamed, stomping forward, waving her arms. You can't do that. I leaned out the cab. I thought you didn't like my plow ruining the aesthetic. The sweetest revenge. She was furious. This isn't funny, Travis. I lifted the ban. I shrugged. For the streets. Nothing about driveways. The group chat erupted with laughing emojis. Eventually, she gave in. Fine. Just plow it. I took my time. Eventually, I cleared her driveway, but only after I'd taken care of everyone else first. Mr. Perkins. Danielle. Greg. By the time I finished, the worst of the crisis was over. People could leave. Get supplies. Check on family. The fallout. The next morning, the city plows finally arrived, too late to matter. An emergency HOA meeting was called by noon. I didn't attend. I watched the group chat instead. We need new leadership. This was a disaster. Melinda failed us. It didn't take long. Within an hour, Melinda Hawthorne was voted out as HOA president. Greg showed up at my door later that day. They want you to take over, he said, grinning. I laughed. No thanks. You're a hero, man. I shrugged. Just did what needed to be done. Epilogue. That night, as I stood at my window, looking out over the clear streets of Maple Heights, I smiled. Melinda would never recover from this. And next time, maybe she'd think twice before crossing the guy with a snowplow.